Welcome to Lead with Hope, the podcast where we explore the power of hope, leadership, and resilience in today's world. I'm Brandy Kelly, and each week I will bring you stories, insights, and actionable advice from leaders, innovators, and changemakers who are using hope as their compass to navigate challenges, create positive impact, and inspire others to do the same. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just beginning your journey, this podcast is here to remind you that no matter the obstacle, hope is the fuel that can drive transformation. So let's dive in and discover how you can lead with hope. Hey everybody, welcome to the Lead with Hope podcast, where we explore habits, optimism, purpose, and excellence in leadership. So I'm curious, what do you do when you feel stuck or wonder how to rediscover joy in your journey as an educator? Right now, nearly 1 in 4 teachers are considering leaving the profession, and student engagement continues to decline. In these challenging times, it's so easy to fall back into old patterns. But what if there was a better way forward? Today's guest, Will Parker, invites us to think differently. This conversation isn't about survival, it's about transformation. If you're ready to rethink your approach to work and to life, this episode is for you. So welcome to the podcast, Will.
Oh my gosh, Brandy Kelly, thank you for the opportunity to just be with you today and any of your learners. It's just an honor. And I'm just going to say at the front end that we're going to flip the mics and put you on my show too. So I can't wait to be interviewing you.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun conversation. I know that through these conversations, I am going to learn from you. So let's just dive right in. The first question I have for you is kind of the why behind your work. What pursued you, Will, to pursue this path?
Yeah, well, I started off as a teacher, much like you and everyone that works in education. We begin our journeys similarly. I know your background is also in social work too, but I spent 11 years in the classroom and then was an administrator for another 13 or 14 years before I was given the invitation to become the executive director for Oklahoma's Association of Secondary School Principals. And so I led that organization along under the umbrella of COSA, a wonderful group in Oklahoma, for 6 years. And then it's been 2 full years, Brandy.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing this work full time as a consultant,
Mm-hmm.
but writing books and creating content and doing podcasts, that work has been going on for the past 10 years almost. So it's been quite a journey, and that's what's led me to what I'm doing today.
Yeah. And, there's so many components to unpack there, Will, but with all of the roles that you have had in education, I'm curious, what's been your favorite?
Oh, I've loved them all. Part of the challenge that I have is figuring out how do you leave something you love to do something you're going to love more.
Yeah.
And so I will say the common thread among all of those that I have loved is the ability to teach. And so whether it was as a classroom teacher, or whether it was as a school leader, being able to influence learning across a campus. And then when I became a supporter of school leaders through the work with the association, and now especially that I get to coach leaders, it is so interesting. I was actually listening to a quick snippet of the Cult of Pedagogy by, is that Jennifer Rodriguez, this morning. And I was just listening to that. I'm not a frequent listener, but I'm an admirer. And as I was listening in, I was just thinking, what the beauty is of her tips on just wonderful strategies for teaching and instruction is that they work everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that joy of being with others, putting yourself at risk, as she would say, being the biggest dork in the room, the one willing to try the craziness before you invite someone else to do it. And there's just something so fun about that. And looking back, I don't think I ever would have dreamed how rewarding the field of education could be, but it has been and it still is.
Yeah, I love that you have identified that theme of teaching as being your main purpose. That seems to be what really fuels your passion. And as you're teaching and you're guiding leaders, one of the big areas that I see in schools is creating that positive, hopeful culture. We live in a society and in a world where we're all drawn to the negativity. I think that's just kind of the way our brain is. Kind of a default, mechanism. We're drawn to that negativity. So for you, as you're working with leaders, what habits, what practices do you cultivate in helping them to create those positive, hopeful cultures in their schools?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. And I want to just verify what you just said too. In fact, this morning I was just reading a newsletter from one of the sponsors from my show, H.O.P.E, which is an organization committed to just encouraging teachers listening. It's a resource for anyone that wants culture building ideas for teachers. But Kimberly Bailey, who's their director of communication, just finished her doctoral work. And Brandy, I know you've done the same thing. And in her research, she was sharing some of the feedback, looking through several years of news media reporting on education. And she's confirmed exactly what you said, that the vast majority of what we see in the news is the negative. It's the depressing parts. It's the trauma. And only when a teacher or an educator is recognized with an award do you see something positive being reported in the news. And so as a result, educators are constantly, and so are our families and community members, and they're constantly getting this impression that what's happening in education is crisis.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that is that if you step into any school across the world, and you and I know this because we work with schools across the U.S. consistently, almost every leader I work with would say that 2 to 5% of their population, they spend a lot of time working with that group of struggling learners or struggling community members. But the vast majority of their kids, teachers, community members are showing up every day, doing what they're supposed to be doing, celebrating success, and that's not getting reported. And so when you ask me the question of how do I practically, build and celebrate culture, I think as a leader, the first thing I have to do is keep a mindset that if I don't own that responsibility, it's not going to be happening, because the tide is already is already against us when it comes to the kind of media that's being propagated, which is why I'm just a big fan of thinking about building culture in 3 categories, which is how do I inspire my students to want to learn? How do I motivate my teachers to want to stay in those classroom settings and helping students? And then how do I reach my community members with what's happening at school? And it was actually my second book, Brandy, called Messaging Matters, where I unpack all 3 of those areas. And I'll just give one quick little tip for when it comes to teachers. I love to do a little practice I called kudos emails, where I'm doing a walkthrough through the school and I'm observing, let's say it's right before, let's say it's 3rd period, and I'm just walking through the day and I walk by Miss Johnston's English classroom and kids are reading Shakespeare, but they're like doing the parts. And so they're like acting out the settings. Or then I go down the hall and there's Miss Miller's math class and there's a student up demonstrating an equation for the other students and helping do some pure instruction. And then I go on down the hall and step out into my ag teacher's classroom, and he's doing a unit on small mechanics that morning, and they're tearing down an engine together. And then I circle around to my fine arts wing, and my choir teacher, Miss Meyer, has my students all singing, and I'm just enthralled by the fact that these same kids that, are out being silly kids during the day, or they're making beautiful music. I can have had that experience in 10 or 15 minutes of walking through my school. What do I do with it? And so what I like to do with it is just sit down later that day and say, kudos teachers. Today, as I was walking through the school 3rd period, this is what I saw happening in Miss Johnston's class and Miss Miller's class and Mr. Soule's class and Miss Meyer's class. What a great place to be a part of. So proud of the students and teachers working hard for learning here. So in that moment, and that's just one example, Brandy, I could give you lots more, but that's just one example of trying to capture the 95% of what's happening. I call it the other side of the moon. If you try to look at the moon from any place on Earth, you can only see one side. You have to get in this, you have to send a satellite or getting a rocket to go to the other side of the moon. And what I like to remind leaders is you get to see more of the moon of your school than anybody else. So show it, and don't. There are pieces that are confidential that you'll never be able to share with others, and that's understandable. But then there's parts of your school that are not, and we have a responsibility there and a privilege to just to shout out the great things that are happening. And I believe that kind of shared intentional mindset and practice, it raises the awareness. And if we all begin to start doing that across an entire school community, then we're all participating and celebrating the 95%.
Yeah. And I love the simplicity of that, Will. Oftentimes we overcomplicate things.
Mhm.
We think that it has to be this grand gesture or something big or, transformational, but it's the simple, consistent actions that really create the culture that we want to see. And so just the simplicity of that is genius. It really is. And if we can get everybody doing that, I say culture is created by all. And so if everybody would do that, even if it were once a week, think about the ripples that would create in your school or your organization.
Yeah. And then duplicate the content. So if I'm going to send out a kudos email like that, then when I'm getting ready to write my next newsletter, I'm going to go back and look for when did I do those kudos emails, and how can I take that same information and duplicate it? Oh, how could those very individual moments have been captured maybe in a short video or a photograph, and we could put those on social media. So we also can do ourselves the favor by just recognizing when we're intentional in those sharings that it doesn't have to be a one-time event either. Go back later and look for those moments, summarize those moments, share those moments at board meetings, share those moments at community events, because I call it, duplicating the effort saves you time too.
Yeah. And when you think about all of the good that's happening in our schools, we've kind of talked about this, there can be one negative thing. There can be a mishap on a field trip, or maybe a scheduling issue, or maybe a teacher, didn't do something that they were supposed to do. And where does all of our focus go? Our focus goes to the negative. And it's something that we have to consistently and intentionally do, is kind of rewire our brain for those optimistic, positive thoughts. But in the face of all of the negativity in our world and because let's be honest, teachers and leaders in education, they have a hard job, and they are under a microscope oftentimes. And we do draw our attention is drawn to that negative. So with that being said, is there anything specific that you would encourage leaders specifically to do to keep themselves staying hopeful?
Well, I'll just be blunt. One is to stay off of social media if it's draining you of that energy and focus, because sometimes, and I love social media when it's used for celebration, but if it's used to beat people up or to, create toxicity, then I would ask you first to think about, what do I intentionally want to be able to place in my mind? And what conversations do I intentionally want to be engaged in, so that I'm not being driven by the algorithms that push people to chaos and crisis and anger and all those things that are happening with digital technology. And so, and here we are using digital technology to talk to each other, and you and I looking for resources and sharing things together and learning from each other. So you can use it for the good. The question is just, how are you going to use it for the good? And I would also say that part of it, and you talk about this in your book, I love this so much about your book, Brandy, is what are the habits that you're willing to create? And those habits begin first with your thoughts, and those thoughts become the ideas or the words that you use. They become the actions, and then they become those routines in your life. And so, man, especially when I'm working with leaders, I just love to invite leaders to give themselves permission to strategize for themselves the outcomes that they want to experience. Because you spend so much time, if you're listening to this, strategizing for other people's success.
Right.
And so whether that's a master schedule, whether that's the school calendar, whether that's a learning plan for students, whether that's a graduation plan, And we can do the same things for us. And so, in my newest book, Whose Permission Are You Waiting For? An Educator's Guide to Doing What You Love, I talk in that book about several different strategies. One of them I call backward mapping, which is, okay, what is the ideal outcome that I would like to achieve? And you can fill in the blank by the end of the school year, or within my career within the next 3 years, or for my family's next vacation. And then put a space on the map, on the calendar, where by this time period, I want to have achieved it. And then backward map, give yourself timelines and benchmarks and action steps that you can be taking to get there. Even when I wrote that book, I sat down a year, actually 2 years in advance, and I began to brainstorm the chapter titles, the objectives I wanted to reach. I came up with 20 specific title areas that I wanted to try to develop. And so I put them on my calendar so that I could be writing in advance toward those goals. And I knew, because I had put the end of when I wanted it to be to an editor for proofing, of when I was going to reach those goals. So backward mapping is just one way. There's lots of different ways, but that's just one way that's been really helpful for me in being intentional about looking at the season I'm going to step in and planning ahead for the achievement I want to be experiencing, not just the challenges I want to be solving.
Yeah, we have to definitely be intentional and get real with ourselves on what we want. We have this one life. What do we want to build for our future? And in my book, I talk about aligning that with your core values. We say a lot of times that one of my most important values are family. Let's just use family, for instance. That's an important value for me. But then when you look at how you spend your time, you don't prioritize that. You try to prioritize other things. And so I think that self-reflection piece is really important in getting real with yourself on what do you value and what do you want to create for yourself and for those that you serve. And I love the idea of backward mapping. I think that is genius.
Well, and I'll add too, because I'm a huge fan of self-reflection. Brandy, I think you and I share so much in common, but I was just reading a book over the weekend, actually talking about being intentional. My kids are now adults. And last year, my oldest daughter said, because we all love to read, she's like, how about we do a book club? And so we pick a book and we set times when we're all going to join together through Zoom, because we don't all live in the same places. And so we're doing a book right now by David Brooks called How to Know a Person, the Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Deeply Seen. And he shared a piece of evidence in there, some research around introspection versus shared reflection. And it was so helpful for me, because introspection is important. It's important for us to stop and reflect on, what did I learn? What can I do differently? How do I manage these challenges moving forward? But the research shows that shared reflection is even more powerful. If I do that with someone else, then I'm going to see parts of my own experience I wouldn't have seen otherwise. I'm going to look more objectively at the work that I'm doing, and I'm going to probably have some ideas for moving forward that I didn't have before either. And so the power of, so figure out where you want to fit that, whether that's a shared working relationship, whether that's entering into a mastermind group, whether that's getting coaching from someone else. I have a coach that coaches me, and I coach all kinds of other leaders in the work I do now. But that shared reflection piece, I think, is a huge part too of just making sure that we build our resilience.
Yeah, I love that. The community connection in the community and sharing those reflective pieces. I also have a coach, and it's interesting to me that sometimes some of the conversations we have, I will then share them with my husband, and to watch his response in the conversations. At one point, my husband Jeremy said to me, "You've only been working with this coach for a couple of years. How does he know you so well?" But he does, because I'm being vulnerable and I'm being honest, and my goal is for growth. And that's something that I see in you as well, Will, because, as we've been talking today, you're talking about the podcast, you're talking about the things you're reading. You are continually and consistently growing, even though you're at a place in your career where you're pouring into other leaders.
Thanks for saying that, because it's important to me to first of all, practice what we teach. And if
Yeah.
we're going to lead learning, then we have to remain learners ourselves.
Mhm.
And then, but man, it's also just so much fun to learn.
Yeah.
And so, so just being able to pursue those curiosities and discover things. There's a chapter in my book that I call Inquiry plus Curiosity equals Discovery.
Mhm.
And I think it's just a cycle that if we give ourselves permission, you can call it lifelong learning or whatever you want to call it. But if we give ourselves permission to remain curious and then to take that curiosity to like, okay, now let me go inquire and learn from someone that may know more about this than I do, or go read their book, or go reach out to them through LinkedIn, or set up a Zoom call, or go to coffee with a friend, or go to visit them and hear someone speak at a conference.
Mhm.
Then I'm going to discover something I've never tried before, or maybe rediscover something that I needed to think about. And applying that means that now I've become a learner again. And
Yeah.
so, and how are we supposed to influence cultures of learning if we're not learning? And so, thank you for saying that, Brandy.
Yeah, I think it's important. And I 1000% agree with you that we consistently need to invest in ourselves and continue to show up for ourselves so that we can show up for others. And that does mean that we're growing and learning until the day that we die, hopefully.
Yep.
And, I think another way that we learn, Will, is through the adversity or the trauma that we experience in our life. And I know that is in large part what has brought me to the point where I am now what I call myself the chief hope officer in Spark Hope EDU. But that process of writing my book helped me to discover that this is where I want to spend my time and my efforts. I want to pour into other people to help them find purpose in their pain, to maybe find systems to help them build the life that they want to create. But for you, Will, is there any kind of adversity or any kind of a pain point that you'd like to share?
Usually when people ask me that question, Brandy, I'll tell them about the year that I almost burned out, and I wrote a resignation letter to my board and principal and put it on my desk and made some new commitments in my school leadership. But I'm going to tell a different story today because you've been so vulnerable about losing your brother.
Mm-hmm.
In 2010, I was home for a kind of an unannounced family vacation. We'd taken the kids back home to see my mom and dad. I grew up on a farm. I have 5 siblings, and unannounced to me or my family, my sister had made the same decision to bring her family. So we all show up at the farm at the same time, and my mom and dad have a big place. And so we were just so excited to see each other. And my other brother lived across the field and had a pool. And so we were just having the best time. Everybody came together, and when they realized we were home. My oldest brother was an artist and a teacher, and his name is Harvey, and he had some heart conditions in his early 40s. But that weekend, he and my third brother, Tim, decided to go to the lake. So we had grown up on a farm, but we'd also grown up spending a lot of our summers in the Kentucky Lake area diving for mussel shells. That was how I paid for my first car and helped support myself through college.
Mm-hmm.
And Harvey and Tim had gone back to the lake, and just they wanted to do some diving together. And Harvey wanted to draw some of the things that he was trying to remember from those experiences because he was writing a new book. And it was after that dive, they were standing by the boat changing clothes, and he collapsed. And my other brother was not able to resuscitate him, called 911. And that tragedy was just like when you tell the story of your brother too, that thing that changes your life forever.
Yeah.
It's that point. It's that moment where life as you knew it, that seems so predictable and so in control at times, and so like you could kind of predict where everybody was going to be going on their path of life. Suddenly, you like the floor drops out from under you.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember 2 things from that experience. One, just the tumbling emotions of feeling so out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And the other, because I'm a person of faith, was just the overwhelming sense of God's presence during that time too, of just holding on to hope in knowing He's in control of what I can't be.
Mm-hmm.
But, a lot of times when I tell the origin stories of why I started writing again, or why I started working on a blog, or why I wrote my first book, or why I ended up doing this work, I'll tell the stories of the lessons I was learning in leadership that led me to start writing those things. But it was really in the 2 years that followed Harvey's death that I also was just coming face to face with, I don't know how much time I have left.
Mm-hmm.
What do I want to do with the time I have? And
Yeah.
how do I make sure it's as meaningful as it can possibly be? And that's not to pretend that I'm the orchestrator of my life or in charge of my destiny. I'm not a person that believes that I'm not God, but I do have a responsibility with what time I do have. And so I would say that hardship really just helped me make some really strong value decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even when my career trajectories were in front of me on what to do next, a lot of times it probably gave me some courage to take some risk I wouldn't have taken otherwise. To
Yeah.
just say, I know this time is limited. I want to make the most of it. I don't want to look back with regret.
Yeah.
And so, I'm sure you've wrestled with that question too. If I was to try to do something I've always wanted to do and I could do it and not look back with regret, what would that be?
Mm-hmm.
And I can say right now I'm doing it. And so it feels good to be able to do that. But I don't think any of us sometimes, and I've heard you say these same things. None of us are who we are. The versions of ourselves we are not without some struggle
Right.
that has brought us to the place we are today.
Well, first of all, Will, I want to say thank you for sharing that. That took some courage, and I know it has provided some inspiration for our listeners, because the fact of the matter is, in our stories, people see themselves and it fosters connection.
Mm-hmm.
And they're looking for hope. There's so many people looking for hope, and people that, I just spoke to a friend of mine and her son passed away, and they're looking for hope. And the only way that I know to give them real, long lasting, sustainable hope is through a relationship with God. But in addition to that, I do believe that we have to take that step forth. We have to choose faith over fear and start moving forward and taking actions. And that's why I built the system of hope, to give people a structure to do that. But in every one of the stories that I hear on this podcast, I am inspired and in awe of how people just continue to move forward and to do the great things that they're doing. But it's not about me. It's not about you. It's about service to God and service to others.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the powerful part of this journey lies.
Yeah, I so agree. And even when I'm talking to friends of mine who don't share my same faith expression or don't consider themselves people of faith, I just like to reframe that question in terms of, okay, tell me the thing that you value the most. Where do you want to say you find your deepest satisfaction? Because because here's the thing, Brandy, if you think you're going to find your deepest satisfaction in the outcomes of your school, or your deepest satisfaction in the outcomes of your children, or the outcomes of your marriage, or the outcomes of your bank account, or that you could just fill in the blanks, you're probably going to be left wanting. But if you find your deepest satisfaction in something that it's often intangible, but
Mm-hmm.
beautiful, and maybe for someone, of course, that's a person of faith, that would be in the relationship with God. But it could also be in the relationships, the most meaningful relationships that you have with the people that you love,
Mm-hmm.
and those experiences that that bring you joy, that spark hope and joy for you,
Mm-hmm.
and just being fully present in the life that you've been given. And so there's just a lot of I just think it's important for all of us just to reflect on not tying our value to our outcomes,
Right.
but tying our commitments to the things we value the most,
Mm-hmm.
as long as those values are ones that can last the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
And they almost always boil down to relationships.
Oh, absolutely. This past weekend, I was able to spend so much time with my family. I have 3 aunts that I love to the moon and back, and
Mhm.
they were all in this area. So I was able to spend time with them. And of course, my children, who are grown, and my grandchildren. And as I was reflecting on my weekend this morning, there's nothing better. There is absolutely nothing better than being able to spend time with the people that you love the most. And when you love the people that you serve in your schools or your organizations, it makes it so much sweeter going to work every day.
And boy, your heart is full.
Yeah.
And when you can show up full like that, then we're just going to show up a better version of ourselves too.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of hope, I have to ask you, what is giving you hope for a brighter future today?
Well, the thing that gives me the most hope right now for a brighter future when I'm working in the work I do now, mostly consulting and training and coaching. I do grow academies for leaders where I meet with teams once a month. I do mastermind groups. I do a lot of one-on-one. Of course, I speak and present like you do too, Brandy. But um, the thing that gives me the most hope is sitting in the room with such amazing educators who care so deeply about their work, and just to watch how thoughtful they are, intentional they are, courageous they are, giving they are, sacrificial. I can't think of enough words to describe how much I love the people that I get to work with who lead in schools. And it gives me hope because I recognize that at the end of the day, when you look at all the research, you and I both know that the the most important factor to determine student success within a school, within the school, I'm not talking about life, just within the school, is the quality of the teacher that a student has. When that teacher's showing up and their quality and their commitment and their dedication is strong, man, the chances for that student are so high for success and growth. And the second biggest factor for that influences the potential for student growth in the school is the quality of its leader.
Yeah.
And so so for me, that's kind of been where my focus has been in this part of my career now, which is how do I give leaders the same kind of support and encouragement and professional development? This morning, I sat down with a group of 6 leaders across the state of Ohio that I've been working with, some of them for several years and some of them for just this past year. And I just asked them for feedback. Why has this mastermind group been so important to you? And among the many things they said, one of them in particular was just like, this is where I go for PD. I spend all my time pouring into other people. And I get to show up here and someone else is pouring into me and we're collectively pouring into each other. So that's where I get my hope, Brandy, is just by seeing that we have no shortage of people who are still committed and dedicated and determined that they're going to serve kids no matter what the politics are, whatever the media says, no matter what the climate is in the world that we live in. The people that I'm seeing that are still making a difference are the same kinds of people that made a difference when you and I were students, when our parents were students, when our grandparents were students, that have always made a difference. Those kinds of people are the ones that make a difference in schools.
Yeah. And it's so much fun to pour into the learning leaders that we get to serve in this space. And I know one way that you're doing that, Will, is with your new book. So can you tell us a little bit more about your new book?
Sure. When I wrote Whose Permission Are You Waiting For? An Educator's Guide to Doing What You Love, I wrote that book as my coaching book because all of the books I've written have usually been in response to a question or a set of questions that people are bringing me. So my first book was really written about my own practices as a leader. My second book was all about messaging and communication. My third book was about how to prevent burnout because that was something I had to work through and help others. But then this book was based on the feedback I was getting in lots of one-on-ones when I'm working with leaders and realizing, wow, they're navigating such complexities. I thought I understood the complexities having been a teacher and a leader. But when you get on the other side of hundreds of people that are also dealing with complexities, you begin to realize that it's not your job to assign an answer to all of the situations that people are struggling with. The better way is to give them a process or a way of thinking that helps them discover the answers for themselves along the way. And so this book was a response to just a lot of the questions people are bringing me about how do I manage this really complex decision? How do I know when I'm standing in front of something really hard, which direction to go? What do I do in my own career? Transition is changing. How do I think practically about things like, and I'll just be honest, pitching myself, how much money I'm making, How do I strategically think ahead 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? How do I learn how to backward map? What are some examples of things that have worked for me, but also other educators when it comes to their own practices, building their own resumes and profiles? But most importantly, the book for me was just an invitation, because I'm a storyteller, an invitation for others to hopefully trust me as a writer and author, a fellow journeyer, to just let's take a walk together. And so the book is set up as, every chapter usually begins with a story or some research or something that I've been learning, but then it invites people into a practice, and it's followed up with some reflection questions. So this is that book that I wrote for the young educator that when I was 30 years ago, I wish somebody had given me then, so I could think about my career as I move forward with some perspective. And it's also written for the veteran educator, someone like where I am in my career now, who's also facing some hard decisions, and they would like a friend in the room as they think about it.
Yeah. And I have my copy and I'm reading it right now. So I am grateful for your knowledge and your expertise. Thank you for coming on the show today and sharing it with me and with the listeners. For those that want to get in contact with you, Will, how would they do that?
They can find all things about me at my website, which is williamdparker.com. And I would love to connect with anyone out there that's listening. And of course, you can check out my podcast, my book, my resources there at williamdparker.com.
Well, I'm looking forward to sharing this with a community of hope-filled leaders. And so thank you once again, Will, for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Brandy.
Thanks for tuning in to Lead with Hope, where we share stories and strategies to help you rise, lead, and redefine what's possible. If today's episode inspired you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. Your support helps us reach more leaders like you who are ready to lead with heart, purpose, and resilience. Don't forget to visit sparkhopeedu.com for resources, upcoming events, and tools to help you build a culture of hope in your life and leadership. We're so grateful to be part of your journey. Until next time, keep leading with hope.